Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the Women's Economic Opportunity Conference. I'm Polly Major, a member of Senator Leahy's staff. Senator Leahy and Marcel have proudly hosted this event for 24 years. While they were sorry to postpone last year's conference, they are glad to be gathering with you again. They wanted to convey a special welcome to the 170 participants who have signed up who are new to this conference. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize the team that makes today's event possible. Thank you to Heather Gagne at VT-SVDC, to my colleagues on Senator Leahy's staff, to the team at the University of Vermont Events Services, and for their help producing this conference. Thanks also goes to our sponsors, who you can see up on the screen, who year after year make this event possible, and to our keynote and panelists for joining today. Finally, I'd like to give a special thanks to my former colleague, Diane Derby, who retired after 20 years in the Senate. Diane organized WEOC for many years and was the driving force behind this year's conference. Thank you, Diane. This conference looks different this year, and we have some housekeeping details to share with you. Our agenda today includes 2 question and answer periods. If you would like to pose a question to our keynote or panelists, please do so by using the Q&A function located at the bottom center of your screen. Staff will be addressing your questions to the speakers, and we will forward as many questions as time allows. Unfortunately, due to the number of participants, we will not be able to fully utilize the chat feature, so please use the Q&A feature for your questions. If you have any technical difficulties, please post them to the Q&A, and we will do our best to provide you with support. We have all learned a lot about online communication through the pandemic, and we all know that it can sometimes be challenging, but we're in good hands with the folks at UVM, and we hope that everything will run smoothly. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, Polly. And I enjoyed talking with you earlier before you came on. Polly and I and the others were talking about the fact that how much Marcel and I miss actually being there for the for this event. We look forward to it every year, and when we can all be together. In fact, I was talking about how so many times the 2 of us would be in the grocery store or walking down the street or something, and people come up and say, you know, I met you at your at the Women's Economic Conference and gained so much from that. I know about the connections made in the Judd Hall of Vermont Tech, and the friendships and the new business ideas, the future careers. So I'm hoping the next year, which will be our 25th anniversary since Marcel and I started this, and with all the wonderful sponsors that have joined us over the years to make it possible, that we can do it in person. And that I'm looking forward to. I can't begin to tell you how much. And our goal, ever since we did the first one back in 1996, has been to connect Vermont women with the resources to help them in their careers or to make career changes. And one of the most valuable assets we've had have been women who have begun their own business, became business owners, and shared their stories. And this year we're going to hear from, I think, a pretty exciting panel of entrepreneurs. And they're speaking about how they adapted their businesses in a very difficult time. Everybody's had to adapt during pandemic disruptions, but what they did was extraordinary, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing about it. They embraced change. They've tapped into their creativity. They've built businesses that are resilient, work for them. And we Vermonters have to know we have to do this if we're going to have a stronger and more equitable economy. I'm also well aware that the pandemic has had an outsized impact on women and women in the workplace. Women's participation in the labor force is now at a 30-year low. The truth is, participation has been stagnant for years. We know that for too long, our nation's economy has not worked as well for women as it should. Look at what's happened in our state and every other state. Pandemic shut down schools and childcare facilities, and mothers shouldered the additional care. And even as schools have returned to in-person learning, frequent closures will disrupt a family's plans. And for a long time, childcare has been too expensive, too scarce for so many. And the pandemic has made it even worse. That's one of the things we're working on this weekend in Washington on the budget, trying to figure out how we make resources available for this. But I also, as I drive around Vermont, I see lawn signs that thank essential workers. And I think that the pandemic has told us that society could not do without our teachers and our healthcare providers, our frontline workers. And being married to a now retired registered nurse, I know what those healthcare workers do. But it also forced us to recognize that too often these essential positions are underpaid, held by women, often women of color. So we have to have a far more just economy, one that recognizes and rewards essential work. So I'm working with senators and members of the House, both parties, on President Biden's Build Back Better plan. Our goal is to create a bill that invests in childcare, that supports working families, that cares for America's most vulnerable. We need your help. Help us think of what the economy should look like. How do we bring new voices into the conversation? How do we protect work and balance a life along with the jobs? How can we make the new workplace flexibilities that we have discovered? How can that create positions that are appealing? And how can we better value those workers that we know are essential? And how can we learn from the lessons of this pandemic, not just in Vermont, but throughout the country? On a separate and very proud note, though, I just want you to know, in the coming weeks, the U.S. Senate will vote on the confirmation of Vermont's Beth Robinson to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Justice Robinson is now a valuable member of our Vermont Supreme Court, but the Senate Judiciary Committee voted for her confirmation this week. She's the first openly gay Vermont Supreme Court justice, and she'll be the first openly LGBTQ woman to serve on the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. I was proud to introduce Justice Robinson in the Senate. I'm going to be proud to vote for her confirmation. And I think we Vermonters can be proud that we only get one seat on the Second Circuit, and know that after Peter Hall's demise, that seat will be filled by Beth Robinson. And one of the leaders here in Vermont who's participating in reimagining our state's future is our keynote speaker, Susanna Davis. Susanna serves as Vermont's first executive director of racial equity. She's held that role since 2019, when she was appointed to it by my friend, the Governor Phil Scott. She works with Vermont state agencies and communities to identify and address systemic racial disparities. Now we're about to I believe, and I'll let her speak to this, we're about to welcome 100 Afghan refugees. Her leadership comes at a very, very special time. And I'm so happy, again, as a Vermonter, she's there. We need her. So Director Davis, it's all yours. I'll step aside. I'm proud to be there with you. I just wish I was there in person to introduce you, but both Marcel and I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Gracias. Buenos dias, everybody. It is truly a pleasure to be here. Senator, I really appreciated your comments before we started the meeting about which books you had your device stacked up on. I'm afraid mine aren't as interesting as yours. I've got Vermont state government since 1965 and Vermont statutes, revision of 1947. So hopefully I will be able to draw my inspiration from the other panelists and workshops and things that are happening in the rest of today's events. So first of all, again, thank you so much for the invitation. It really is an honor to be here. This is an event that has gone on for most of my life. And when I look back at the record of how it has evolved, it's truly clear that it's been of such great utility, not just to individual women peppered around the state of Vermont, but to everybody in their ripple effect, who they affect. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So thank you for having me. You know, as you might have heard, the Executive Director of Racial Equity is a relatively new position for Vermont state government. And while it got its share of fanfare in the summer of 2019 when I was first appointed, I would like to share with you all a little bit of the work that we've been doing since then. We've worked hard with our sister agencies across state government on internal and external facing policy. Things like fair and impartial policing, stimulus funds to get communities through tough times at the outset of the pandemic, how we provide health services to people by treating the whole person. We've been poking our noses into conversations all over the state to help people at the local level figure out how to grow or at least retain their town populations. And of course, we've been a sounding board for leaders of all kinds who want to take bold action to be and do better on matters of equity. But you probably knew all that. What you may not have known is that all of this work is bigger than race and ethnicity. It always has been. This work is essential in all corners of the state and in every sector, because there's a collective benefit to equity and a collective harm to inequity. But before we jump into that, let's back up a bit. First, let's talk about opportunity. Do you ever notice that we talk about opportunity like it's a fungible good, like it's some sort of coupon that we can just pass to the person behind us in the checkout line? We talk about giving opportunities, or maybe you're a little more aggressive, seizing opportunities. That's okay. Or we talk about creating opportunities as if they can just materialize, like, poof, opportunity. But out of all the verbs we choose to deploy on these opportunities, there's always the implication that there's a transfer, that there's a person who holds or creates opportunities, and that the rest of us are just trying to get a piece. That's our first mistake. Thinking that an opportunity is something that must be given or surrendered to us, or that we've got to wrestle it from someone's firm grip. And there are a few reasons for this thinking. After all, there's a lot of money to be made from girl power. We can produce highly dramatized films about long ignored women historical figures, or sell a self-help book about how to be the next successful businesswoman who can have it all. But for a lot of us, the barriers to opportunity aren't just something that we can unlock with 3 easy payments of $39.99. But wait, there's more. Now, many of the barriers are systemic. They are structural. They're bigger than any of us as individuals, but they absolutely impact all of us as individuals. And that's what I meant when I said that racial equity is bigger than race. You see, when we think of women's economic opportunity, Many people incorrectly assume that these opportunities are only for the benefit of women. They are not. Women are 51% of the US population. We're not a special interest. We are the interest. Something that impacts the numerical majority is inevitably something that impacts the whole. Think about it. Childcare, reproductive justice. Do you think these are only women's issues? Well, have you ever been a child? Have you ever known or cared about a child? Then childcare should matter to you. I'm reminded of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who for years was rather indignant about parental leave and childcare issues. He didn't get it, and he didn't want to get it until his daughter had children and struggled to balance her parental duties with her professional life. Then suddenly Grandpa Scalia was leaving work early to drop off children here and there and babysitting. And you know what? He changed his stance. He suddenly realized that the burden didn't simply fall on his adult daughter, and that even if it did, it shouldn't have. And that's the point. There are ripple effects to the ways in which we treat people in society. And when we talk about women's economic opportunity, like it's a hobby or a solo mission, like it's something that can be bartered or restricted to only during nap time, then we're ignoring the network that surrounds us that will be impacted by those choices and resources. And this is true in the racial equity space too. In workshops and trainings, I often ask people to consider the benefits and the rights that they enjoy today that were fought and won by people of color. For example, Ernesto Miranda. Do you know him? You do. You just may not know that you know him. Ernesto Miranda is a Latino man who is the reason that you get read your Miranda rights if you get arrested. Silvia Mendez, ring a bell? You know her. Yeah, you do. She was on a postal stamp. Mendez v. Westminster, 1946. That's the court case that gave us Brown v. Board. And Brown v. Board is the case that gave every child, including your child, the right to a free and fair basic education. Truth is, in the United States, every gain accomplished by members of dominant groups always benefits members of dominant groups, and only sometimes benefits members of historically marginalized or oppressed groups. But every gain accomplished by historically oppressed groups always benefits members of dominant groups. Affirmative action. Do you know who is the #1 beneficiary group of affirmative action policies in education and employment in the US? That's right, white women. So when we think about equity and reducing structural systemic barriers, there's always a collective benefit to equity. And that's why Senator Leahy has been doing this conference since 1996. You think he likes making people wake up early on a Saturday? Well, maybe, but really, it's because he knows what's been right in front of us all along. That when we stop disempowering people, we all move forward. We all win. And you know why? Because life isn't zero sum. And your winning does not equate my losing. And we know this better today, but people didn't always recognize this truth. Let's think back to the women's suffrage movement. Even B. Anthony was kind of racist. Why people like Sojourner Truth and later Bell Hooks had to ask the question, am I a woman? This is reflective of a bigger concept, a concept you've likely heard of, called intersectionality. Intersectionality is what makes us dynamic and multifaceted. It's what multiplies our strength as a movement and as a community. Because I'm not just a woman, I'm also a person of color. I'm also a millennial, I'm right-handed. These are only some of my many identities, and certainly not the most important ones. And when we allow ourselves to represent all of ourselves without letting it come between us, that's when we will have used intersectionality for good. And of course, intersectionality sometimes has its thorns. 2 days ago was Latino Women's Equal Pay Day in the US. I'll explain what that means. You see, we already know that in the US, women statistically make less money for the same work than men do. And separately, we also know that people of color statistically make less money for the same work than white people do. So, statistically speaking, My intersecting identities as a woman and as a person of color make me more likely to earn less than my male counterparts of all ethnicities and less than my women-identified peers who are white. So what is Women's Equal Pay Day? Well, it's the symbolic date that represents how much more or how much longer a woman has to work in order to match the earnings of a man in the previous year. In 2021, Women's Equal Pay Day was March 24th. So that means that if a woman and a man started working on January 1st of 2020, the man earns what he earns through December 31st of 2020. And then it would take the woman until March 24th of this year to catch up to the earnings of a man that he made by December 31st of the previous year. I'll put it another way. Based on these figures, women worked for free beginning at about 2:40 p.m. every day. But that's not the full story. For most women of color, Equal Pay Day comes much later in the year. For example, Equal Pay Day for Asian American and Pacific Islander women was March 9th, but for Black American women, it was August 3rd. For Indigenous women in the US, Equal Pay Day was September 8th of this year. And for Latina women, that's the bucket where you'll find me, it was October 21st. So in other words, statistically speaking, I would have needed to work all of calendar year 2020 plus an additional 9 months and 3 weeks to earn the same that a white man earned in calendar year 2020. And remember intersectionality. This goes far beyond race. There are different equal pay days for mothers, for members of the LGBTQIA+ population, etc. And I need to make an important point, and it's one that my best friend frequently raises. The goal is not to look at what white men are doing and say, yeah, we want the right to do that. Because, no offense, but everything is kind of awful. And I feel like after about 400 BCE, we really needed to start questioning their judgment a little more. So no, that's not the standard. It's about making the same money for this. It's not about making the same money for the same work, if that work is only fueling oppression and ecological harm. All of this is to say that it's not enough to lump us all into one large bucket and think that we're doing enough. That's not true equity. Equity means recognizing that within our communities, there are different challenges and also different skill sets for finding solutions to those challenges. Trust each other more. Trust one another's experience more. And on the topic of trust, and speaking of solutions, let's think about how we can turn this dialogue toward action. First things first, action by who? Who gets to do the thing? Who gets to decide what the thing is? If your rights and liberties are restricted and determined by someone else, then your power is contingent upon them giving you permission to exercise it. Like asking men who can vote to vote on whether you can vote. I think it was Upton Sinclair who said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding. Or think of holding hearings on reproductive justice without any women present. Don't ever forget, nothing about us without us. So we are through asking for permission. For those who want to join us in advancing justice, what we need is genuine and sincere support. And support is different from permission. It's not about asking to be given opportunities, and it's not about having to seize them either. It's about the recognition that opportunity just exists. It always has. And the question is not whether or how to grant it, but rather how to stop blocking it. This is an important point. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it. People often see equity work as some kind of handout, as if people who've been oppressed are asking to be given something. Incorrect. What's needed is that we stop actively blocking and suppressing people's ability to move and thrive and grow and exist. That is the key. So, how do we stop blocking? Well, first, we must make meaningful investments of time, effort, and finances, not token gestures. It means when we talk about mentorship, we don't just shuffle women into the same paths where they still wind up working for rich men to make those rich men richer. It means when your staff tell you they want you to revise workplace policies because they unjustly prejudice your women-identified workers, You listen. And don't just listen for the sake of saying, okay, I listened and I'm still going to keep doing things the way we've always done them because that's how we've always done them. It means listening for the purpose of action. Take a broad view. If you don't provide parental leave to a male employee, you know who suffers? A new mother who might have to delay her re-entry into the workforce, perhaps permanently, because her partner can't participate in child rearing duties. That is a withholding of a woman's economic opportunity. And you need to turn your thermostats up in the office. I'm serious. This has patriarchy written all over it. And I know what you're thinking. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. The formula for office temperatures was devised based on the resting metabolic rate of a man, of several men. And those men were an average of age 40 and 154 pounds. And they were all wearing suits and ties. The workforce looks very different today. People are working later, and as they get into their senior years, they may experience more temperature sensitivity. There are more women in offices. And of course, because of the gender binary, we are expected to dress a certain way in the office. So think of the summer wardrobe, the skirt, the sandals, the fluttery sleeved tops. And then think about how cold you always see us in the offices. There's actually a formula, and I strongly recommend that you check it out because it's fascinating and infuriating. A formula that determines what's the ideal office temperature based on a person in 1950 who was a 40-year-old man in a suit who weighed 154 pounds. That's not today's workforce. And that's what we mean when we say that inequity is systemic. The formulas are actually built in to our lives through infrastructure and employment practices. So anyway, when half the office is shivering and stepping into the service stairwell every couple hours to thaw out, you need to bump up the temperature. But I digress. So as I bring my remarks to a close, I want to share with you a quote. It's from James Joyce's Ulysses, in which the speaker says, "We feel in England that we have treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame." And I really enjoy that line because it speaks to how we distance ourselves from the oppression of others. You see, stating that history is to blame, it implies, well, A, that there was nothing we could have done about it, and B, that we're not responsible for fixing things. But of course, that isn't true. We are absolutely in control of how we invest, how we govern, how we vote, and how we envision opportunity. As you engage with today's workshops, panels, and networking settings throughout the day, keep these things in mind. Who is at the table? Who's missing? Which intersecting identities are at play here, and who shapes the agenda for action? Remember what Senator Leahy said, we want a stronger and more equitable economy. And we can get there, but it must include all of us. Whatever your career might be, equity is still your job. Thank you so much for your time.
Paul, if I could just step in just a moment. Thank you so much for that. That's fascinating. And the beauty of it is both Marcel and I could hear it. And thank you for doing this. I wish that 99 other members of the U.S. Senate could hear what you had to say. Now, the good thing is there are a number of them who know that and would agree with you right away. There's some others, the learning process has been a little bit slower. So thank you for doing this. Incidentally, your story about Justice Scalia, whom I knew well, even though we disagreed on so many things. I know that story very, very well. And I told him, now the reality has caught up with the rhetoric. And let's pay attention to the reality. And I think he finally understood. You can live in the judicial monastery only so much. Come out in the real world, which is also why I'm so excited that Beth Robinson is going on the Second Circuit, because she's one that feels that way. But I'm so glad you're our director. And oh, that was a great speech. I don't know if you ad-libbed it or if you had any of this written. If you have it written, please give it to Paulie, because I would like to put it in the congressional record. It was that good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you, Susanna, for your inspiring words. And now I would like to invite our conference participants to post some questions for Ms. Davis using the question and answer feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're already seeing a couple come in. The first was a comment saying, "You rock, Susanna." So I wanted to pass it along. And the second question is coming in from Nellie Palmer, and she said, "How large a budget has the state of Vermont allocated to the newly created racial equity area? And do you think it's sufficient to make a difference?" And I think adding on to that, kind of what can we do to support your work as Vermonters?
Excellent questions. So how large of a budget? It's a tricky question because there is the money that is directly allocated to the office. And then there's all of the investment that we have to make in racial equity that has to happen outside of this office. So the direct answer to the question is that the monies allocated are insufficient to pay for me to eat, and also purchases of equipment, technology, that kind of thing. And then there was recently approved an increase to hire 2 staff members. I'm very pleased to say that the application period just closed earlier this week, and we received 49 applications for between the 2 positions. We're extremely excited and grateful to everyone for their interest, and so we're going to be onboarding those 2 staff later on this year. Now, that's the money that comes to the Racial Equity Office. Separately, the legislature allocated various sums of money for this office to perform other work. For example, there was money allocated to the Human Resources Department so that this office and the Human Rights Commission could do more education and training. There was also money allocated so that this office could hire a vendor to help us with a separate process that's going on. So there's that money that's not for this office, but to be used by this office. And then, of course, there's a third bucket, which is all of the investments we have to make in equity that happen beyond this office. And that, I think, is the most important point. When I first got here, a lot of people kept saying, "We've got to give more money to your office. We've got to give you more money. What do you want? What do you need?" And I used to tell them the same thing, which was, well, I mean, sure, a staff person would be nice, but I don't want you to think that the totality of your equity investment is going to come to this office, because inequity doesn't necessarily show itself in this office. It shows itself in housing and policing and employment and education and health. And those are the sectors in which we need to invest, not just in the one person who we think has it all covered. I can't go out there and build affordable housing because I don't have upper body strength, but we have housing departments and we have other partners who can do that. And so we need to make those investments in those sectors.
Thanks for that answer. And as we wait for other questions to come in, once again, you can use the question and answer feature in the chat. Just wondering what you see as kind of the biggest lessons from the pandemic, and what we can take forward to make meaningful change in this space.
You know, one of the biggest lessons that we learned from the pandemic is that nobody is safe. And I don't mean that in the germophobic, let's all be afraid of one another for the rest of our lives way, because I don't think that that's a healthy response either. But what I mean is, if you thought you would walk out of there unaffected, you were incorrect. We have all been touched by the pandemic, and unfortunately, not even unfortunately, predictably, communities of color, communities living in poverty, women, LGBTQIA+ population, people living with disabilities, were impacted the earliest and the most. That was a big lesson that a lot of us knew would happen, but I think more people realized it as it was happening. For example, so-called frontline workers are more often than not people of color. Disproportionately, we are represented in the body of so-called frontline workers who are repeatedly told how much they're appreciated and valued, but not enough for a living wage. So one of the lessons that we learned from the pandemic was that we had to embrace our, let me go ahead and say it, our hypocrisy as a society, where we tell ourselves that we have certain values, but we do not act them out in times of crisis. Another important lesson that we learned from the pandemic is that, well, money is a made-up thing. When we needed more dollars for people or for programs or for assistance, it somehow materialized. And the reason that I bring this up is because whenever we talk about equity work or justice, one of the first barriers that we encounter is people who say, well, I don't know, this is going to cost a lot. Well, how much is it going to cost us to treat people fairly? And really, when we do that, we're not anchoring the need. We're anchoring our comfort level. It's akin to saying, I've got 20 grand. How much justice can I buy for that? As opposed to saying, how much justice is needed? And then asking, what's it going to take? And so when we were in a time of crisis nationally and rather really internationally, dollars mattered, but somehow we made it work. And so similarly, we've got to understand that there is a tremendous sense of urgency to correct injustice. Yes, we've been waiting hundreds of years. We could probably wait another 6 months. However, we shouldn't have to. There is a great sense of urgency because if justice was a good idea yesterday and yesteryear, then it's a good idea now. And so the price tag should not be what stands in our way. Those are some of the lessons that the pandemic has taught us and is continuing to teach us.
Thank you for that. And we have a question coming in from Emma Spett, and she asks, a big part of the racial equity conversation in Vermont is to do with creating welcoming communities. Are there examples of success you can point to, or some steps communities can be taking to do better?
Absolutely, there are steps that we can all be taking to do better. You know, I remember a few weeks ago, I went up to one of the lakes in this beautiful state, gorgeous lake, and there were other people who were like-minded who were also there. And I remember being so disappointed. I had arrived with my the people I was with, and predictably, I was the only person of color, and I was immediately noticed by people who were already there. And within 5 minutes, the beach had been cleared out. I actually heard a child when I arrived say, "Dad, what's to your left?" Which, I mean, first of all, bro, you need to learn how to be discreet, right? But also, it was just very unsettling. And after a few minutes, I remember sitting there in my little lawn chair and thinking, I don't even want to be here anymore. It's just, I don't have it in me anymore. I really just wanted to go home. That is an incredible example. It's not an incredible example. It's an example of how you don't have to say anything to a person or do anything to a person and still create an environment that is so incredibly unwelcoming that it knocks a person off kilter. And that's my experience. That's a mild experience compared to what other people in Vermont are going through. Harrowing experiences that are not getting the attention and the results that they deserve. So yes, there's a whole lot that we could be doing. And some of the examples that do inspire are things like when I hear from a town who says, hey, we want to request that we get more refugees coming into our town. We're ready to do this. Or when I hear from people who say, we are looking to hire a person to work on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues. And we want to invest meaningfully and tangibly, and we want to pay this person fairly for that work. Or when they say, we have created a code of conduct for our local officials so that they can adhere to a standard that we believe embodies justice. Now, it's very easy to mistake inclusion for diversity, because diversity is just a numbers game. That's just how much melanin can we get in the photo for the brochure. It's just how many brown bodies or how many people with wheelchairs can we prominently feature in visible positions to make us look non-biased. That's diversity. Genuine inclusion, and more important, more to this point, a genuine sense of belonging is when people's voices and perspectives and presence is meaningfully included in the decision-making and in the discussion. It means not tokenizing people, not saying, oh, are you coming from a war-torn country and experiencing deep trauma? Why don't you come to my town so that we can look like we're diverse? But in reality, there's going to be no culturally relevant foods in the grocery store. Your children are going to get bullied and re-traumatized, and you're going to be living on a street where everybody is flying flags that are deeply offensive. That's tokenizing, and that actually ends up causing further harm than if we just left folks alone. So I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. The real goal here is sincerity and effectiveness. If what you're doing benefits you as a member of a dominant group, more than it does the person you're seeking to help, then you've got to reframe your attitude. It should be a two-way exchange, not just a benefit to you so that you can feel good about yourself. And I think that should really be the approach.
So we have a question that came in from Christine Beal, and she asked, homelessness is such a huge problem in our state. Housing inequity is a crisis that seems to baffle leaders at every level. This seems to be directly related to racial and gender equity and social justice in so many ways. What are some potential solutions that you envision?
Some of the solutions that are really necessary include things like working more with, and if necessary, above lending institutions to reduce lending discrimination. We know that historically, this has been a country where, for a time, women were not even permitted to open a bank account without the approval of some man in their lives. And yeah, sure, there are anti-discrimination laws on the books, but there's also laws that say you have to stop at a stop sign on the books, right? And so when we think about the figurative rolling stops that lending institutions are making, we have to ask ourselves, what impact is that having on housing? For example, we know that if you are a homeowner of color looking to get your house appraised, your appraisal is likely to come in undervalued because of what you look like. In fact, they tell homeowners of color, take the books off of your shelves and take your family photos off of the walls so that the appraisers or potential buyers don't see what you look like, because they will undersell you. And this isn't just what happens to people in the so-called middle class or in that region. It happens even to wealthy people. So that's one aspect of the housing market that is tied to deeply entrenched notions about what is valuable and who deserves to be compensated fairly for their goods, their time, their work, or their resources. Another really important point here that we cannot not say is that the land we know as Vermont remains unceded Indigenous territory. So as we talk about land use and home ownership and who gets to own and relegate property, it's really important to keep in mind that we're talking about the use and sale and transfer and living of land that was never ours to begin with. And there's a real atonement that has to happen with that, and a real tangible move toward justice. I think the question was asking for more practical solutions, so I'll get back to a couple of those. Some of the other things that we've got to keep in mind are things like, how are we training, how are we looking at documentation, for example? We know that oftentimes when people are seeking housing, whether it's rental or otherwise, they're asked to provide things like pay stubs or copies of credit card bills or what have you. What about alternate documentation that shows financial soundness that may not be the traditional ones you're thinking of? For example, rental payments are often not counted positively towards a person's credit score, but one of the few bills that many people pay on time is their rent because of the high stakes of that. So think about alternate documentation that can show financial soundness, not just the documents we've been expected to show all these years. I also remind the group that it was only in the early 80s that credit scores were invented. We are absolutely the guinea pig generation for that. So think about, how do we determine what is creditworthiness? What does it mean for a person to be good for it? And how can we extend opportunity to people who are still starting out? In Vermont, white Vermonters and Indigenous Vermonters have median ages in the mid and late 40s respectively, but all other Vermonters of color have median ages in the 20s. And the reason that matters is because this is the next generation of homeowners, new parents enrolling their children in schools, keeping those schools open, people starting businesses, people entering the market, people graduating from our colleges. Are we retaining that class of people? Because not only are they the age group prime for looking for housing, they're also an age group that is less likely to afford Vermont's housing, and they're also more likely to be racially and ethnically diverse.
Well, Susanna, I hope we get to have a longer conversation about housing in the future. It's one of the topics I cover for Senator Leahy. We have a question and comment from Sarah Kearns, and she said, "It's great to hear an inspirational speech, and yours was amazing. What also matters is what happens after the speech. Can you suggest a few specific actions anyone listening can take to further these goals?"
Absolutely. Step 0 is lower your guard and open your eyes. When we talk about issues of equity, whether it's equity for gender, sex, gender identity, ability, race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, whatever it is, the move for equity can be difficult because it triggers feelings of defensiveness by people in dominant groups. And those dominant groups may be that you're male or you're affluent or you're white or you live in a particular part of the country or what have you, right? So before we can do the learning and the unlearning, before we can do the investing tangibly, before we can really make meaningful strides, the first thing we have to do is lower that guard. Because if we're unwilling to accept that we enjoy unearned privilege in society, then every positive step towards justice feels like, what is the saying? I think I read a poem once, and I think it said something to the effect of, they took so much from me that when I did something for myself, they felt like they were being robbed. That's what we want to avoid. So the first thing is own your privilege. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to wallow in guilt over it. I have a lot of privilege in society. I have educational privilege. New York State lets me put letters behind my name and suddenly people think I'm smart and they take me seriously, right? I have privilege that I speak English with this accent. That gets me past a phone interview. I have privilege that my parents are legal in this country. There's a certain fear that we just don't have when it comes to immigration, right? I'm grateful for all of these privileges and I own them and I don't have to be ashamed of them, but I do have to understand that many of them are unearned and that therefore I benefit from a system that is designed to prize and privilege some and oppress others. And once I'm able to just accept that, that's where we can really do the deep learning. So I think that that's really the first step for people to do. Another tangible thing that you can do is you've got to start educating yourself about accurate history. It's very surprising to a lot of, I think a good 20% of my job is just teaching Americans about their own history. And it's odd because I had to learn it first, right? I'm first generation in this country, so I don't have roots in America. I am the root, right? And so having to learn those things and then teach them to people who are from here is really interesting because I think that people think that this country has always been just and has always been fair. And truth is, it really hasn't and it still isn't. And so I think learning accurate history and understanding how we got here is the second important thing you can do. And then the third thing that you can do, honestly, is know when to step up and step back. Sometimes situations call for your leadership, and sometimes situations call for you to step aside and let someone else be that leader. Are you applying for a position that you know you're likely to get, but there's another person who may be able to benefit more from it because that person hasn't had opportunity? Maybe step aside, right? Those are some of the considerations that you can make.
So I think we have time for about one more question. And I know we touched on the lessons from the pandemic earlier, but Emily Atunin has a question specifically around opportunities for people living with disabilities. So she asked, can we take the lessons of the pandemic to ensure access to opportunity for those of us with disabilities? And Emily is a first-time attendee of WEOC.
All right. Well, thank you. It's an excellent question because it's interesting. First of all, what's important to know is that not every disability is visible. And so the expectation that what's colloquially called abled, the expectation that we have that somehow we're supposed to be able to notice and understand everyone's disabilities is really misguided. We've got to educate ourselves better about what is a disability and what are the ways it affects people and it affects us. The other thing is to consider how COVID-19 has erected barriers for some and reduced barriers for others. I'll give you examples. When things started closing down in person and started moving more toward virtual communications, a lot of people who maybe had mobility issues, things became a little bit easier for them because they could join meetings by Zoom or what have you, right? It made access broader for people. However, there are some people who actually don't thrive in that environment and who needed to have that human interaction or that in-person communication. And so it was actually more challenging for them. Understanding how one event or one set of circumstances can both help some with disabilities and hurt others with disabilities is really important. And so as we think about the phrase, which I don't like, but going back to normal, and this idea of, are we going to start doing things in person again? Are we going to start shifting away from recording our meetings and making them live streamed in public? Consider who is going to be left out once again when you do that. And ask yourself, can we create some sort of in-between? Another really important thing to keep in mind when it comes to the community of people living with disabilities is something that has just left my brain. And it was a really excellent point. I'm so disappointed that I can't remember it. It just poof, gone. Oh man. Maybe it'll come to me before we close.
Well, I think we could listen to you answer questions all day, Susanna. Thank you so much for your address and for interacting with our participants here this morning.
Polly,
We're going to move.
I'm so sorry, Polly. I just remembered it and I can't.
Oh, please.
Well, thank you. So the other thing I was going to say was we have to have a multi-sectoral approach to protecting our friends and peers and loved ones with disabilities. And I say this because, you know, in my previous role, I was working at the New York City Department of Health. And as you know, New York has a robust public transit system. So it's we consider it pretty easy to get around the city most of the time. But you know, I remember I was collaborating on a project with some of my colleagues in the housing department, and they said, hey, we're going to do a community forum, but can we do it in the health department's building? Because, you know, we have a couple of people who are going to be joining us who use wheelchairs, and our building isn't accessible. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm sitting here in my, you know, it's like LEED certified, gold level, green building, the health department's brand new building in Queens. And I said, oh yeah, this is great. You know, all our doorways are 42s and we can do it, no problem. The building is accessible. And as I'm saying this, I'm looking out the window and I saw the 7 train roll by and I thought, oh my gosh, you know what? No, we actually can't do it here because even though our building is accessible, that train stop is not. There is no escalator. And so thinking about how we can make our best efforts to be inclusive, but we still live with infrastructure around us, right? And if our partners and if our overarching government or our built environment are not also attuned to those needs, then our efforts end up being moot. That is a tree that fell in the woods and nobody heard it. Why? Because the train didn't go past those woods. So these are things to consider. We really need a multi-sectoral approach.
Well, I'm glad that came back into your mind. Thank you for sharing.
And if I could just speak here for a moment, Susanna, that was so great. And the nice thing about it, even though we're not in person, both Marcel and I were able to hear everything you had to say. I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to sometime in Vermont when we can actually see people in person and not on a screen like this. We can see you. And it's in our family, it really resonates. What you had to say will resonate very much in our family with the white members and the Black members of our family. And it means an awful lot to us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Senator. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you both. And now we're going to move to a 4-minute break and we'll be back at 10 o'clock for the panel discussion. Welcome back, everyone, from our break. I hope you had a brief chance to get away. I would now like to welcome on Gwen Picallo, a longtime WEOC organizing committee member, for her panel of women business leaders. So Gwen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Polly, and thank you to the Senator's office and the Senator for investing in today's session. And for the last 4 years, it's been an awesome opportunity to get inspired. Thank you also to Heather for all of your behind the scenes work. We're in for a real treat today. My name's Gwen Picallo. That's not what the treat is. It's a treat for me. I get to facilitate this panel today. And the group of panelists got together yesterday, and it was a pretty inspiring conversation. What it was inspiring to me was that we talked about, so we've got these women business owners, right, who are leaders in their field. You're going to hear from them. They're at different stages of their entrepreneurial development, of their business development. So I think that's going to be a really rich part of the conversation. But what was really moving to me was the fact that the conversation really highlighted the roles and responsibilities that we as women often have to take on to make our world work for us. And what you're going to hear from our three panelists today is how they evolved not just their business, but their life practice to really focus on what was important and what was going to work for them, their families, and their relationships. And it wasn't just because of the pandemic, but the pandemic sure did throw a wrench in the wheel that made these women innovate over the last 2 years. I think that you're going to have a really good conversation today. I'll introduce the panelists and then we'll get right into it. Thanks all for being here today. So our panelists, we're honored to be joined by Abby Lechtaler. Excuse me, Abby, I'm sorry about that. From Downtown Grocery in Ludlow. Akshita Nayak of, most recently of Little Pataka, just this year launched a children's media brand promoting diversity. You might also know Akshita as the owner of Alternative Roots Wellness, or formerly of Orange Owl Cosmetics. And Julia Byrne Fields, the 4th generation owner of Byrne Chocolates. Welcome, ladies. It's so nice to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gwen.
Okay, so we know that you're amazing entrepreneurs. I think all of our mouths are salivating as we look at Julia's background of all her gorgeous chocolates. Now, okay, so you're entrepreneurs, you're these like entrepreneurial powerhouses, you're also people. So who else are you? Tell us so we can get to know you a little better. Maybe for now, we'll just we'll go Abby, Akshita, and then Julia, and then we won't do it alphabetically each time, promise.
Thank you, Gwen. Yes, so first off, I have to say I was so blown away by Susanna. Yes, somebody to take our tiny, super white state in the right direction as far as racial equity, and with such style and charisma. Yes, I'm really inspired, and that was awesome. And then also to the two gals here with me, y'all are so cool and awesome. I'm also super inspired by y'all. So excited to see more from you too. Yes, so Abby Lechtaler grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, but married a Vermonter man who lured me back up this way, and I'm so grateful to him for doing that. This is such an incredible place to live. We have the Downtown Grocery restaurant, which is 11 years deep now in Ludlow by Okemo Mountain, but also bought and renovated an old space in 2016, which we opened as Mama's Handmade Italian for 2 years. And we also did Westtown Eatery, which was a summer gig affiliated with the Weston Playhouse. So I went to school at the University of Colorado studying journalism, but always really obsessed with travel. So started working in restaurants to fund that love. And yeah, now 11 years here in Vermont, just super grateful to be in this state as far as business, but also a challenge to keep the business going, especially in hospitality, with such a seasonal base in Vermont. Yeah, but that's basically the story thus far.
Welcome, Abby. Thank you.
Thank
Akshita.
you, Gwen.
And Akshita, who else are you?
I grew up in India, and my parents are watching, so hi. I'm really excited they could make it. But yeah, I grew up in India and moved to the US in 2003. So it's been a while now. And I met my husband in Maine. He was like hugging a tree. And so I decided that, yeah, big city girl is going to marry this little rural Maine boy. And we then traveled around a bit in the Northeast for education and stuff. I have 2 Master of Science degrees, one in biochemistry and one in clinical nutrition. And then Vermont was about as south as my main boy was ready to go. And so we found a place here that we loved. And we've been here for a little over a decade and been in charge of a few different businesses that I've worked on now. And I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and she is downstairs listening to music and coloring. So there's a very good chance that you might see her wandering around here in the background. We'll see how that goes over this hour. But yeah, so that's me. I'm an entrepreneur, an accidental entrepreneur. And I'm a mom, I'm a daughter, a wife, and I am very interested, especially in the last few years, my interest in working to make sure that women have the opportunities to stand up, take up space, present their ideas, and make them a reality is something that has become very important to me. And that's why I started working with you at the CWE, Gwen. And that's why I'm starting to participate and sort of speak up at these panels that I'm honored to be invited to. So thank you.
Thank you, Akshata. It's a real inspiration to have you here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
And Julia, tell us who you are.
Who am I? I moved to Vermont when I was 6 and with the family business. And we started Burn Chocolates of Vermont. My dad and uncle, as third generation, my great grandfather founded the business in 1915. So a little bit of a different spin. I've taken over officially 5 years ago, the family business, but this is who I am outside of the business. So my husband and I met. My degree, well, I'll go back. My degree is in elementary ed, love kids and teaching kids and being around kids. And that's my passion. And I've done it for a long time. I taught the children's program at Sugarbush for a long time. And that's where I met my husband. I was a ski instructor. He was a snowboard instructor. We had, the mountain love. And that was a long time ago. We've been married for over 10 years now, and have a 2.5-year-old little guy. And I'm on the board of Prevent Child Abuse Vermont. And that's something that, I'm obviously extremely passionate about, and keeping Vermont kids safe and having support for families that are struggling in that realm. So that's kind of my passion project and where I dedicate some of my time when I'm not working or with my little guy. So happy to be here. Very honored. This is an amazing event and can't wait to dive into the convo.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, Julia. Wow, what a cool group of people. So, okay. So there was a pandemic recently. Were the last 2 years all bad?
Oh man, no, definitely not. Yeah, I left out my children. Shocking. I do have 2 children too, and a puppy and 2 cats, and sadly just 3 chickens now. The foxes have been very hungry over the last year at our house. But yes, a 6 and 8-year-old, and for us, it was such an incredible moment to shift gears because for the first 9 years, it really felt like the business was running us, especially as we, sort of started to put more irons in the fire and open other places and buy property and renovate and move into the house Rogan grew up in. So it was a really incredible moment to take stock of what the hell we were doing and who we were putting first, because so often for us, the business and the employees and the guests, we felt really indebted to in a way. And so to get to lock our doors and have the children at the business with us doing curbside pickup for 14 months, was really nice for a little bit for the start to get to just be with the family and having dinners together every night. Eating and drinking obviously is our main objective in life. So yeah, that was a really awesome change of pace to sort of put our family first.
How about you, Julia?
So yes, it was not all bad. It was very bad at the beginning, when things hit, and we're wholesale manufacturers and 100% B2B. So all of our retailers, all of our customers were shut down, when the pandemic first hit. And so we didn't know what to do. I don't think anyone did. So, safety of our employees was number one. So we sent everyone home. They ended up staying home for 6 weeks, paid and on payroll. We were able to do that, and very, very grateful. It was really important to us. We have a lot of new Americans that work with us that English is not their first language. And as we all know, the unemployment was a nightmare, and just someone where English is their main language, it was challenging. So imagine someone that's not computer literate, or isn't, really strong with the English language. So it was really important for us to keep them on payroll. We were able to do so due to funding. We got the PPP grant, or loan, and then it was thankfully forgiven. So, but anyway, so yeah, it was really terrifying. We actually had a spreadsheet. My husband is also in the business with me, and we had a spreadsheet literally that was called end of days. And how long can we float the business if we have no sales coming in and we're paying our employees and we're paying, the bills and all of that. We were not shut down. My husband stayed here. We did lose our childcare, so I was home with our 1-year-old. And it was really scary. We had a few customers that were already doing online sales. They were still calling, they were still ordering. My husband was answering the phone, he was shipping, he was invoicing, he was a one-man show for those 6 weeks. And we then, brought our employees back slowly and in kind of groups. And, as more information became available, masks and plexiglass and all this, we had to totally invent our space here, as everyone pretty much did who was coming back to work. And then, the summer went by and the holiday season came, and it's been madness ever since. Incredibly grateful. Everyone is eating a lot of chocolate, so thank you. But maybe ease up a little bit. Things are crazy. So yeah, the holidays hit and everyone was kind of nostalgic buying and, gifting, and they weren't seeing people. So they were gifting even more and sending smaller items, like chocolate, and also I think stress eating. And so it's just across the board. We are busier than we've ever been. So that has been an incredible kind of flip from the beginning of all of this. It's now we're experiencing extreme growing pains in a very short amount of time with, things still not back to normal and a lot of challenges. But yes, so our business is very strong right now, and we're incredibly grateful for that.
Julia, I think you had said yesterday you doubled in size.
Yeah, we're doubling our output right now. We're making double the amount of truffles every day than we did last year, which is like a normal. Yeah, so yes. And yeah.
Wow, that's big.
Maybe don't make your chocolates look as nice as they do behind
I
you.
know.
You do that, then people are going to eat it.
Yes, you're probably getting more
Help us
sales.
help you, Julia. Help us help you.
Yes, more sales right
Thank you.
now because of that background, Julia.
Exactly.
More sales right now.
I know.
Oh, that's great. And Akshita, okay, talk about a crazy 2 years. Talk about a crazy
I'm
2 years.
glad you saved me for the last one.
Tell us, Akshita, all of the stuff. What
Yes,
was the last
so-
2 years all that?
Well, it was a mix of things because I have 3 different stories. So one was my husband and I own Alternative Roots Wellness Center. He's a chiropractor and I'm a nutritionist, and this is based in Essex Junction. So when the pandemic hit, we had to close down. Given the closed nature of Greg's work, if a chiropractor says he can treat you online, definitely find somebody else. And so because of the closed nature of the work, we had to close down. I could move my nutrition stuff online, but because it was cash-based, people were suddenly not sure if they could spend the money. And so that definitely affected it. And they were all eating Julia's chocolates. And so they didn't want me to tell them that they shouldn't be doing that. And so that was a bit of a problem. So we had to shut down and try and get that business, Alternative Wellness Center, through the pandemic. And we did everything we could. Greg would go in and see only the people with very strict regulations. Anyone who said that if he didn't see them, they'd have to either go to urgent care or something else because, they're back, they're just hurted, anything. If he could help, he would go and do that because our instructions were to keep them out of emergency rooms. We weren't sure what would happen given what was happening in New York and everything. We weren't sure, if sudden floods of people would come into our emergencies. And so that was our main goal, was making sure that we answered the phone, we helped people out, stretches, maybe, whatever we could do over the phone, online, we were trying to do it, but we couldn't go in and see people face to face. So we definitely took a hit there for a while, and that was very scary. As so many others did, and so that was one thing. And now we are slowly finding our way back out. I feel that people are starting to realize that this is something that will be around for a while, and they have been a bit battered, for whatever their work being at home, sort of cooped up. And so people are coming back out and now realizing they need to get back to making sure that they're healthy, they're feeling good. And so that's picking up. So that's great. That's one story. My other experience was with my business, the Orange Owl, that you mentioned, formerly of the Orange Owl. It was a vegan skincare product business where I made everything from scratch. I didn't have any employees. I was wearing all the hats, and I had started that at the same time as our wellness center about a decade ago, 2010, when we moved here. And slowly over time, it was about 60 stores in the Northeast, which isn't a lot, but if you're the one labeling every single lip balm, you feel that. And of course, then we had our online business as well. And so, and I used to do shows. So I used to travel between I think about October to January, I used to be home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I was out the rest of the time. So it was an incredible amount of travel. And then, I had a tough pregnancy, a tough delivery, recovery from that. I hurt my shoulder, things just kept happening. And I had to have surgery. And I realized I couldn't keep up production as much. And my husband tried to help me keep production up, but, he was a full-time chiropractor. And so trying to do that and this meant he got 5 minutes a day with our newborn daughter. So we started reevaluating what was important. And once the pandemic hit for that, we realized we just needed to sort of be okay with ourselves. And so it was one of the most gut-wrenching decisions I've made because it was a brand and a business I started from scratch and grew store by store by store, customer by customer by customer by myself. To let that go was not an easy thing, but I did. I decided to close down. I still get emails. I'm still called the owl lady. So all of that is, still happening. But the day I made the decision and I said the words out loud, I remember feeling a weight lift off my shoulders because it was the right decision to make at that time. And I was happy that I made it. It was not easy, but I was happy that I did that. And so that, is my other story is I had to close down a business. I had to be home with my daughter because, as Julia mentioned, childcare was closed. So while Greg was trying to do what he could with the clinic, I was home with Ava. But then, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur, your brain kind of gets wired differently. And so while I was home with her, I speak 5 languages. I sing to her in all of them. I speak to her in many of them. But I noticed she would reply only in English. Given that my husband's American, that's our default at home. And the most conversation that she hears, sort of like a say and reply, is in English. Also because of the pandemic, she couldn't see a lot of my family on a regular basis. So the languages weren't happening as much. And so, yeah. I decided to make one book for her to introduce her to my native language of Konkani, which is a South Indian language. There are no books for children in this language until extremely recently. I'm talking, very, very recently. A reason for that was also for the longest time, there was no written script for it. It was orally passed down. And so I was like, okay, let me make something for her. While I was making it for her, I realized my husband needs to learn it. And so I was trying to do something that would make both of them learn the language. And, the wheels just started turning that this doesn't exist. I started looking at other languages that might be similar, that are either on the in danger of dying out or something like that, I started looking it up and noticed that there were many that could be addressed in this way. And then in the summer, we had the incredible rise of the racial justice movement. And that made me realize, as a person of color in this country, how much more needs to be done in terms of just having conversations about this. Like, forget policy. There is so much that needs to be done for policy, but to be able to have a conversation, to speak about it, that is so sorely lacking. And so that just brought that out so much. And you could also see, as an Asian person, you could also see this us versus them ideology that was spreading right across the world. And so just being parts of these different communities made me realize that there was a lot that needed to be done here. So all of this sort of converged into me starting Little Pataka. So I closed a business, moved one through the pandemic and helped it through, and started a new one. That was my last 2 years. Little Pataka is a children's brand I started that helps create different media for different stages of development for children, young children, and with the express focus of making sure we promote diversity and shatter stereotypes. So that's what we're doing.
And actually, would you like to tell us what Little Pataka stands for?
Yes. Well, Pataka is a Hindi word and it means firecracker. So little firecracker, which is what my little one downstairs is. And all kids are, right? They just need a spark of encouragement and they'll just realize their absolute full potential. And that's what we want them to do. But my daughter inspired this whole thing. So it's Little Pataka.
That's awesome.
So
Oh my
good.
goodness. Talk about getting some stuff done in the last 2 years. Wow.
Yes.
And so you know what's fun is all of you have this in common. You all are in at least one business venture with your significant other. And as we talked about yesterday, there's an entire body of research, right? Like academic research about people, what happens when there are entrepreneurial couples. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you, maybe on a daily basis, and then what that looked like for you during the pandemic when things got much smaller. Maybe actually we can start with you since we haven't started with you yet.
Yeah, sure. If people aren't already tired of me droning on and on. Yeah, for me and Greg, it was different. We met in a lab. We were both lab rats. We met while working on our master's in biochemistry at the time of PhD program. We got our master's and left, but we met in lab. We worked together. We did a lot of projects together. So that was our introduction to each other. So we've always worked with each other and we've always made a good team, whether it's professionally or personally. So it hasn't been that difficult for us. And I know this surprises many people because there's always some sort of something. But for us, it's actually been simple. And I think one of the main reasons for that is we've been extremely clear about our roles in the different businesses. For the clinic, I'm a nutritionist there, but he makes all the decisions when it comes to what the main things about the clinic. That's him. With the Orange Owl, he was what I called a forced volunteer, but I made the decisions there. So, he would help me and have suggestions, and I do the same thing, for the clinic, but the decision there is his, the decision here is was mine. And with Little Pataka, it's the same thing again. It's my business. He helps me out and, advises me on many different things. But having these clear-cut lanes and where we fit, make sure that we don't sort of cross over and have any big sort of issues that really prop up. And so I think that has worked really well for us. And yeah, so I don't have much to say about, trying to get over things and stuff. We just sort of fit well together.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Abby, how about you?
Ooh, yeah, it is way more of a challenge. Greg, yes, that's impressive. No, we definitely are always working to stay focused on the idea that we're moving in the same direction. I think for us, the hardest thing is that it's hospitality. And so there's a lot of in the moment stress when you have guests waiting for you and their expectations. So it's a lot of like deep breaths and remembering that we're both under stress at the same time, which is, never puts anybody in their best headspace. 11 years in, we've gotten really good at moving through things swiftly, and both understanding that like in the heat of the moment, it's the heat of the moment. And then when it's over, it's over and we're ourselves again. But I think having that empathy and compassion for each other, and the understanding that like we're both perfectionists, we both want it done the way we want it done, and in that moment feel both really headstrong about how we think it should be done. And just again, like having the wherewithal to understand that like, okay, we're both in a hot kitchen, and it was really hot this summer and last summer. And then also the compassion of like, the world is falling apart around us. I do a really good job of like disconnecting and not watching the news, but it still would seep in. And so we also just really tried to take stock of the fact that, dang, this is a crazy, crazy world we live in. And the stress of all of it was a lot. So, again, just the compassion and deep breaths and getting outside as much as possible. We both are obsessed with being in the garden. And so if I could just weed and deadhead with rosé, like that is my dream day, is weeding and deadheading with some wine. And he is like, working on the compost and, all his seeds. That was like massively important. And for me too, driving everywhere, because a lot of our distributors getting product was quite tricky. So we oftentimes were both driving like opposite directions to pick things up. And so we'd be listening to, I'd be listening to podcasts with the kids, Purple Rocket podcast, or But Why from VPR, listening to podcasts to just like stay entertained with things that weren't, super stressful and scary. What were super helpful too, and a great way to like escape and realize that like life is bigger than our tunnel vision of how to make the day work and be a success. But it's always a challenge. And luckily I know that working with him, he is delivering the best product, the best experience for our guests. And that's like always something that is really comforting to me. I would never do this business with anybody else. And he's super, so that helped that too. Yeah, that's about it.
Great, Abby, thank you. And Julia, tell us what it's like. I mean, you're deep. You've got family, blood family, plus husband. Tell us about it.
Yes, the other family no longer is in, they're retired. So that was like a big thing for our relationship. And, the outlaw, as my husband calls himself, coming in with my dad, my uncle, it was just a lot. And we also met working together at Sugarbush, teaching skiing and snowboarding. And, we loved that. That was very carefree and fun. But we knew we wanted to work together. We also were caretakers of a private island on Lake Champlain for 2 summers, Stave Island. And we lived on the island full time. And we were, groundskeepers. We would cook for the couple that own the island when they come out every weekend and entertain. And then we managed a Mexican restaurant too, together. So we knew we wanted to work together. Hi. So cute. Yeah, so my dad and uncle kind of were like, well, what's your plan? Like you're ski bumming, you're, caretaking this island. This isn't like real life. And My uncle doesn't have kids. I don't have siblings. So the secession was pretty succinct. Yeah, they just said, we want to retire. We want to start talking about that. So, yeah, we came into the business and I said, together, my husband was not super thrilled, or he was apprehensive because he had a great relationship with my dad, and just didn't want to compromise that. And it's a lot of family. But there's no one that I trust more, and we work incredibly well together. We're very, very different as far as like our brains, and he is very mechanical. He loves to like read a manual, and then he can go and work on like he can do anything with all of the chocolate machines. And he's like, oh, okay, like this, and Rober, let me just read through, and it's like Swiss made, and then he can go and fix it, which is amazing. And he does all of our IT work, and anything that breaks, he can fix. And I'm more, so that was another thing too, that we had to do. And we found out through just living it, was that it was confusing to our employees, like who's who. So people would kind of mom and dad us like, oh, she's like really relaxed on this, and then go around to Mel, my husband, on other things. And I'm like, yeah, I said fine. He's like, no, so we had to like draw a line and be like, nope, like he's healthcare, I'm this, like PTO, he's this, I'm that. And so we would just have to say like a hard no on when employees would come to either one of us on certain things. And that really helped. That was huge to kind of define our roles and make it super clear. And that was also when my dad and uncle were in the business too. They were kind of half in, half out, half retired, half not. So there was just confusion with leadership. And so we made the transition of ownership in 2016. And then, yeah, so we've defined our roles. And the hardest thing I think through the pandemic and working with your partner was just, there was no, boundaries, and it was just all our whole life. We weren't really seeing friends. We weren't really doing anything like activities outside of the house. And, so it was just like, it was all mushed together, and it was really hard. We'd be like sitting down for dinner and being like, okay, so this, and we're like, no, like we had to like really try and say no to like work talk at home, which is completely not, a reality. But, we try and just, because it was just too much, and you never get a break in that. And we still struggle with that. And especially now, because we're still in the pandemic, like it's not over. And so I think that's our biggest challenge, is just like, saying like, okay, this is family time, and we need to, do things together and stop thinking about work. And at some point at night, just not working and putting that away and really doing other things, because we could do it all night long, all morning, every second. It takes over your life. So not having that like a clear in and out or off and on is always a challenge, but we continue to work on it and kind of call each other out on it when we're like, okay. Or if he's just like staring off when we're like playing with our kid, and I'm like, all right, you need to snap out of it, like come back. He's like, okay. So yeah. And I think, it's just, I trust him more than anyone. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's, it is our family, our life. And so whenever I ask him to do something, I just know that it's going to be done extremely well. And yeah, so that's what it's like. We used to carpool every day. We do not do that. And we haven't for probably 7 years.
Totally.
We like to kind of have our own space and, listen to our own podcasts or music or whatever it is, and have kind of just, like I want to stop at the store and not be tied, 24/7. We do eat lunch together every day though.
That's nice. Yeah, we lived above the restaurant for 7 years. And so the commute of like walking up the back stairs was not that healthy. So now our 15-minute drive, like as slow as possible, is so great with my seat heater, and like a little fresh air. I love that commute.
Yes, that's key.
Yeah, have a little break. Certainly. So before I go on, audience members, if you have questions for our team here, please feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we can get to those as we're able. Let's get into some of this stuff around how the impact, the pandemic impacted or shifted your approach to your business relationships. And we had a really good conversation yesterday talking about what became overwhelmingly important, what directed you to making the decisions that you did to focus where you did in your business. Julia, have you gone first yet? I don't think
so.
Okay, Julia, start us off.
All right. So I would say relationships, local relationships were huge during the pandemic. So, you know, we know a lot of business owners. I'm on the board of the chamber, and it's so important as a business owner or as anyone, you know, to get involved in the community. And it is all about who you know, and in the great times and the toughest of times. And you know, leaning on our other business owners when we weren't able to get ice packs and it was hot and we were, you know, shipping chocolate. I called up Lake Champlain Chocolate. I called up Vermont Nut Free. I'm like, hey guys, you know, do you have any ice packs? They're like, yeah, we'll meet you here on a Saturday. Here you go. And it was just so incredible. And, you know, I think that's the great thing about our state is that, you know, someone might think we're competitors, and we're not. Like, we all want to be successful and to see each other succeed. And, you know, we basically had like this barter system going on. What do you need? Do you need decoration? Do you need, you know, boxes, any of that? So that was huge. We also get our heavy cream from Monument Farms, and they're local as well. And so it just kind of, I think the whole pandemic did make you think about how, you know, how reliant are we on outside goods and where are they coming from? And, you know, let's start that garden up, because I don't want to, you know, go to the grocery store and have no food. And so it kind of brought back like that local community. And I think that's so incredibly important in every aspect. So I think that, and then, you know, just employee retention and just keeping our people really happy and keeping, you know, having them be really engaged, so one thing we did during the pandemic, when we were paying everyone to sit at home, we're like, what can they do for us? So I mailed out everyone like a self-evaluation, and it was like 3 pages, and it was like, take your time, but like, what is, you know, and it really, and everyone, I mean, some people wrote a book, and, you know, we're like, what could we be doing differently? What is your role? Like, how do you see yourself the next 5-10 years? I don't know, but it was amazing and so incredible. And I think everyone really felt heard. And, you know, I really, really needed and wanted to know kind of where they were in their career and how they were, you know, how they were reflecting on us as business owners during the transition from my dad and uncle. And it was really valuable. And I still have everyone's evaluation. I kind of bring it back every once in a while. I'm like, okay, are we doing what we said we were doing? Are they, you know, and just keeping them engaged. And I think we've always, you know, treated our people really well, but it's a change in ownership. And some of the people, we have employees that have worked here for 30 years and remember when I had my birthday parties at the chocolate factory. So just make it, you know, everyone has been so welcoming and incredible and respectful with that. But it is like, okay, like, you know, how do you feel about this? And how do you feel, you know, how are we doing? And what are your needs? And how can we best support you? So overall communication, community, and just, yeah.
Best birthday party idea ever.
Yeah, I know my friends here are like, we can't wait for Teo's birthday parties at the chocolate factory.
I mean, Willy Wonka has got nothing like that. We
would just enrobe everything, you know, gummy worms, Oreos, had a piñata.
Nobody can compete with that.
I feel like our insurance company wouldn't like that now.
I mean, dang.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Julia. Abby, tell us, what did your community look like?
Yeah, you know, for us, the relationship stuff, it was was so much more about us just sort of realizing, we closed Mama's Handmade Italian, the massive Main Street renovation that we did the end of 2019, which was a tough decision, but thank the Lord that happened pre-pandemic. And that was kind of the start of us realizing, like, trying to do everything is really not fun. We cannot be everywhere. And we just felt like we were just like pulled in a thousand different directions. So for us to sort of reel it in and start to do the takeaway stuff, it was just Rogan cooking everything. And he, had a massive menu to keep people interested. And people were really hungry, eating their chocolates, but also wanting some Nashville hot fried chicken and some halibut and papio and some gorgeous sea strolls and chocolate mousse and all that good stuff and homemade ice cream. So for us to sort of rein in what we were doing and really just focus on these 5 to 10 orders a night with like crazy attention to detail, me with my like pack of Sharpies, frenetically writing like every single detail of every dish on every box with my hearts and thank you notes on the receipts, and just really trying to do it really well, even though it was for quite a small number. And realizing that like we don't have to be all things to everybody. Like, let's just treat these 10 guests really, really well. And for me, coming from Mississippi, from the hospitality state, like that piece is so crucial. And people have always said like they can taste the love from Rogan, they can taste his inspiration. So it was a really poignant moment for us to give people some love and some nourishment through gloves, through a mask, through our like locked door. Like the door was always locked. I'm like, putting it in the trunk and trying to say thank you through like rows and rows of seats. And but it was just a chance for us to zero in on the relationships with our guests in a way more intimate way. And that's sort of what we then was the eye-opening moment to realize, you know what, we don't need to sell the place out like with 100 covers every night. We can sell 21 seats and have it just be Rogan in the kitchen and me out front and a bartender. And that shift in realizing that like being with our guests that's what fills us up, and that's what they really, really want, is what we've realized. And so to do 16 covers, 17, 19, maximum of 21, letting go of the ego of like, oh yeah, we crushed our record, or we've got people. And it was amazing while it lasted, those 9 years of having people lined up at the door and unlocking at 5:30 and filling the seats. It was such a blast and invigorating, but crazy stressful and really a lot. And keeping the culture dialed in as far as staff and my insane pre-meetings, like talking through every dish. It was a lot. And so now the relationship, the stress, this is what I'm doing here, the stress level, it's so much lower, and we feel like we're delivering so much more to our guests. So for us, the relationship piece was more about sort of reevaluating, what are we trying to give to people? Is it a packed house and raucous bistro? Like, yes, that was awesome for some time, but now everybody's super spaced out and it's way more intimate, and we feel so much more fulfilled.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Good.
Very cool, Abby. Akshita, tell us.
If my daughter will let me.
Oh, totally. Wait, maybe we can all say hi. Everybody from home saying hi.
Don't encourage her. She won't leave. She loves the attention. No, she's doing well. Yeah, for us, it was, I think for the clinic, it was a lot about making sure that our patients were able to reach us and get the information they needed to help themselves during what was an incredibly stressful time in a lot of people's lives. But also, I started doing these videos online for our clinic where I would talk about it's okay to be okay. I know a lot of people went through a lot of bad stuff, but some people didn't, and that's okay. Like, don't feel guilty about it. You don't all have to go through the bad things. I'm very happy for you that you haven't. Just sort of putting that information out there and that energy out there that it's okay to be okay and it's okay to not be okay. They're both happening simultaneously, and that might fluctuate even within just a day or an hour. You might feel great and then suddenly be like, what is happening? And so we tried really hard to make sure we were putting videos out there, making sure our patients were okay. And that was for the clinic, just sort of shepherding people as much as we could, because healthcare definitely was so front and center for so many people, and making sure also that they got the right information, given that this was a whole new virus that nobody had ever seen. But given our background in immunology, biochemistry, and basic research that I've done, just that background helped us explain a lot of these things to our patients. And I think that was nice to have that sort of connection going on for the clinic. For the Orange Owl, it was a lot of like question and answers of answering that I am closing down. How do I, just relationships with the stores and buyers, and sort of making sure it wasn't something I just abruptly stopped. Because these were people I'd gotten to know over a decade, and I didn't want to just let that go. So that, that slowly sort of reduced and came down with the Orange Owl. And for Little Pataka, for me, starting a business in a pandemic in an industry I knew nothing about, like all of a sudden now I'm an author, like what? So learning everything that goes into that, finding illustrators, because I'm not that talented. I have ideas in my head, but somebody has to actually make it look nice on paper. So, finding illustrators for that, developing that relationship, finding printers, like everything was crazy, trying to find printers who could meet me where I needed them, that, I wouldn't be able to print thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. I'm just starting out. Who will support me? And I found a wonderful printer in India who was able to help me out with that. So there were a lot of things like that. And also, as Julia and Abby had mentioned earlier as well, was just local relationships. Sweet Clover Market, Healthy Living were my first two stores for the Orange Owl. They were the first two stores I spoke to for Little Pataka, and Sweet Clover is carrying, in Sweet Clover Market in Essex is carrying my stuff. And now I'm reaching out to buyers of the other stores that were carrying the Orange Owl products as gifts, because you can carry this as gifts for kids. So that has been really interesting to sort of change the relationship in a way that the product is different, but I'm still making it, like, and they're like, really? From skincare to, children's media. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what's happening. I'm just going with it. And so that's been interesting. And new relationships, like Phoenix Books in Vermont has been an incredible supporter. And so they've gone out of their way to make sure that I have the information I need in an industry I knew nothing about. They're giving me as much of it as I can. The Flying Pig in Shelburne just started carrying my books. And so things like that, these local relationships always make such a huge difference, because it's a boost. It's such a boost to have all of these people be so generous with, it's an ego boost. Like talking to these people, I come out, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling good right now. Like, I don't want to let go of that high for a little while, right? And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, there's still a lot to be done. But Vermont, I think in general, is very generous with it. The community is very generous with its business owners, small business owners. I've always felt that. And so I'm happy to be here and continue seeing that in different industries and different fields as my businesses keep changing. So that has been really nice.
Very cool. Talk about a way to highlight Vermont. I mean,
yeah. Yes.
So we've got a couple of great questions, ladies. And I also know that we're coming up at 10. I think we're supposed to wrap up at 10:55. I bet we can steal like another 2 minutes though. I hope that's okay. Because I want to make sure that we also address what's next for you. How did you redefine success for your business? And so what's next? And I'll just plant, how about this? I plant the 2 questions in here that might end up shaping your answer. So we had from Nellie Palmer for Julia, have you considered growing sales by opening retail stores? Okay. And then Miyeko, hey Miyeko, asks Akshata, can you speak about your crowdfunding campaign, which was very successful for Little Pataka? So Abby, why don't we close out with you? How did you redefine success in your business, and what's next for you guys?
Yeah, well, the redefinition of like the successful restaurant for us was just the massive downsize, and realizing that while it was awesome to create a culture and have a bunch of employees who were really an extension of our family, while it lasted, to rein that in and have it just be Rogan and me with a bartender has just been such a new lease on life for our family. So releasing dates month to month at 12:01 a.m. On the 1st, and having the month sell out in the first few days has just been incredibly gratifying, and also being face to face with guests and having it be so tiny, people just are responding really, really well, like tearfully even, which is just, it makes us teary too, because it's just such an incredible thing to fill people up with more than just the food, but also, with figuring out what we want to do with the downtown grocery. We almost sold our spot on Main Street, and then thought better of it, and are reopening in the next 2 months as a vintage arcade bar, Game Bird, with another old chef, Weston Nicole, doing fancy fried chicken. So still managing to push ourselves and into a different realm with the 80s and 90s arcade games. Get your quarters ready. There's a shortage, so hold on to them and come in. So yeah, still doing new things, but having someone else do the food, which is really like invigorating for us to kind of delve into a new realm with the arcade stuff, and it's nostalgic and fun. So we're excited about that. But I think the biggest thing for us has been that redefinition of success, and realizing it's not about how many people we can bring in. It's about the quality of service that we're bringing to the much smaller number. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Abby. All right, Julia, tell us what's next.
All right. This is a good one, because I think I have some work to do on that. But I will say for retail, that's not the direction we're going in, but I appreciate that question, because it does seem like an obvious, I think all of our competitors who make wholesale truffles do have a retail location. And that's kind of what differentiates us. And we kind of say that 100% of our focus is on our wholesale customers and on our retail customers. And so we're not trying to, make retail under, in our storefront, and then, our customers would kind of be second over that. But and we were in retail many, many, many years ago with my grandfather. We had 11 retail stores in New York and Pennsylvania forever ago. And so we kind of, my dad and uncle, they had retail in New Jersey, and it was nights, weekends, everything Abby is coming from. And with a family, it's hard. And so we have a really great schedule for our employees, like 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. And, for us, for the future, I think it's automation, and it's really focusing on efficiencies. But, our operations manager keeps asking the question. She's like, Julia, like, what is burn? Like, what do you want burn to be? And I'm still figuring that out. And that's, I don't know what the future holds or what we want it to do. Right now, I definitely feel like I'm working for the business, and I'd love for the business to start working for me. So that's kind of what I'm figuring out right now.
Oh, that's exciting, Julia. And Julia, I'll just throw this in here. I think you had said you're hiring. Is that true?
We are hiring. Yes, this is a big goal of my outreach in public right now. Yes, so we are hiring for every position: chocolate makers, maintenance, office, supervisory position,
Taste tester.
entry level. What?
Taste testers.
Yes, taste
testers.
testers, always. We're doing a lot of R&D right now due to supply chain challenges. But our website is birnn.com/careers. And you can also just email truffles@Burn for any more information. But we're hiring for everything. We love and treat our employees very well. So, and free chocolate with an interview.
Hey, great. Thanks, Julia.
Yes, thank you, Gwen.
And Akshata, take us out. What is next for you?
Yeah, and Miyako, thank you, Miyako, for the little plug of the crowdfunding campaign. Yeah, I did. So I launched, when I launched Little Pataka, I created, I had an idea of what the product should be, and we made them. And then both of my previous businesses had been started with money from my family. And then just because of everything that was happening with the pandemic, planning and B didn't work out. And so then I was like, now what do I do? And so I decided to do a Kickstarter campaign. And it took a lot of work to make that happen, and to put a brand out there that nobody knew about. So it wasn't like I was launching a product of an established brand. I was launching a brand with a Kickstarter campaign. And we did that in April this year. And we crossed our initial goal in like under 5 days, which was ridiculous. And we raised 160% of what we wanted to. And yeah,
Wow.
so it was incredible. And where usual Kickstarter averages are $25, ours was 132. So people showed up, they stepped up big time. And so that blew my mind, but also told me that this information and this content was something that people were looking for. And so I'm really excited that I have that much excitement behind me as well, that there are people pushing for this. And so yeah, what's up for Little Pataka coming up? The clinic is, picking up and it's doing well. Greg is in clinic seeing patients. I'm still doing nutrition online just because it helps me juggle Little Pataka work as well as the clinic work a little more efficiently. So that's what I'm doing. And for Little Pataka itself, my hope is over the next, few years, I can show that, as I think Abby had mentioned, Vermont's always called the second whitest state in this country, right? And I see that. And what I would like to show is that a brand that has a Hindi word in its name, Pataka, run by a person who looks like me, I'm a woman of color, and creating the content that we want to, which is making sure people start looking, seeing and learning from differences rather than being wary of them. Putting that kind of content out into the world, I want to show that this can take root in a state like Vermont. It won't solve all the issues, but it'll definitely help move the needle in the right direction. And that's what I want Little Pataka to do over the next few years, is just show that we can do this, and we can do it in a state like Vermont because there are people who are looking for it and there are people who are ready for it. And then they can bring others along with them. So that's my hope for Little Pataka.
That's fantastic. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you so much for sharing your inspiration and your truth with us today. It's a real blessing to have you here in Vermont as leaders. So Abby, Julia, and Akshata, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for sticking around. I'll hand it back over to Polly.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, and thanks to all our panelists for that really interesting discussion. And thanks to all our participants for joining us here this morning. As Senator Leahy said in his speech, he and Marcel truly appreciate hearing your stories about WEOC. And so you can feel free to share them with his office. You can get the contact information on his Senate website online. In the coming days, we're going to be sending out conference evaluations. Please share your thoughts and comments about this year's conference. Each year we use this feedback to make the next conference more effective and more relevant. And we're all really looking forward to celebrating the 25th annual Women's Economic Opportunity Conference in this coming year, hopefully in person with all of you. And so your comments are really going to be useful to all of us as we work together to put that event together. So just to close, please join me in thanking our panelists and thanking our keynote once again. And thank you all for participating, and have a nice day.